So Liz Cheney lost her primary to an opportunist who seized the day by basically riding the completely delusional and I will say very malevolent mood permeating all things GOP these days. Still rather remarkable to see her lose by 30 plus points when in her last election run she won by many points as well. That's the way it's going these days with the GOP. Now, I did try to read her chart in as positive a light as possible. And I have to say, I wasn't making it up. Her position, by all accounts, was and is a winning position, but she didn't win. And I have to tell you, I've seen this before in charts that I've read and even in my own chart. It's one thing to say you get pushed back by life in some way. That typically happens on squares and oppositions and some difficult conjunctions. For example, most notoriously, Saturn. Now, she is on the Saturn opposite her sun writ large, meaning her Leo planets are early, but Saturn is still in Aquarius. It's just that I've seen politicians still do well on that particular setup where the opposition is far away from the degrees. For example, Bill Clinton was elected in 1992. He's a Leo, Saturn was in Aquarius. And of course, with Bill Clinton, Jupiter was crossing his ascendant. And this is where, for Liz, even though she's on a Jupiter trine, which is quite nice, even stronger would be next summer when Jupiter will cross her ascendant. But that's not when the primary was. So in this case, she lost. Still, when I look at her chart and see that Jupiter is in a trine, and then when I check her progressions, I see her progressed ascendant going over her natal Venus. I see this as a high point in her life. Something very important is happening. Something very important is brewing potentially. You could perhaps project this onto the progressed sun, because progressed sun is something that will stay in a sign about 30 years. Just now, within months, it'll be changing signs in her chart. And it's typical in people's lives. Important new beginnings happen. And then there is, of course, the fact that by the time we get into next year, Jupiter crosses her ascendant. And by then Saturn is in Pisces, which means it has left the opposition to her sun sign. So my feeling is she is almost certainly destined for something big, something bigger. And my best guess is it would have to be politics, because she seems determined to oppose the ways of the criminal ex-president and his persistent attempts to damage, if not end, democracy. And so I can't say what that will be, but I suspect it'll be something really important. And now keep in mind that though she was known prior to this, she's really known now. She's raised her profile a whole lot. Obviously not at the level of the GOP base, but overall, her profile is much, much bigger than it was prior to this. She's gained the respect of many. I'm completely aware that in terms of her policies, she's never going to get support from Democrats, because, to be honest, she isn't just conservative, in quotes, she's actually very conservative. And so it would be difficult for a Democrat to support her. But I often say to people in politics, you have to appreciate that the enemy of your enemy is your friend at certain points. And in this case, she defended democracy, and she continues to defend democracy. And I have to give her a ton of credit for that. I think it's absolutely great. So in that sense, I wish her well. The other thing is that you can see from her connections to Trump's chart that she is very likely to not just be now, but continue to be a thorn in his side, because you see all sorts of things. For example, you see that since she's Taurus rising, Venus becomes a very important planet as ruler of the ascendant. That Venus is precisely over his Mercury, thereby activating his axis Hollywood T-square, which I can tell you for a fact he does not like. It's like finding someone's vulnerable point. And her Cancer planets are in his 12th. When you've got disagreements with someone, and this is pretty serious, this is very acrimonious. The last thing you need is for that person to have planets in your 12th, because they're basically going to be digging into your secrets and into your criminality. But then you see further problems. If you look at her mutable planets, he would be Saturn, Moon square, very tight, but then there are Virgo planets, Uranus, Pluto. If you look at the average degrees of those planets, what the Uranus, Pluto do is they pull back on the Saturn, Moon degrees so that you get a kind of strength point earlier in the mutable degrees, thereby linking them to Trump's Sun and Moon opposition, which happens in the 21 to 24 range. And so this becomes extremely problematic when the person is effectively your enemy. Notice too that Pluto-Uranus is eerily reminiscent of, in fact, precisely so, to Michael Cohen, his ex-lawyer, who is now extremely opposed to Trump. He has Uranus, Pluto in those degrees as well. This is what happens between people's charts, where you see squares and oppositions. They can be very stimulating, provided the relationship is working, but if it ever breaks down, it becomes extremely dangerous. You can even see that her ascendant at 6-7 degrees Taurus is semi-square Trump's sun and sesqui-square or sesqui-quadrant, 135 degrees to his moon. That's another irritating factor between them. And of course, her having Taurus energy up above in his zenith sign means he's going to reluctantly respect her. And of course he would. For one thing, she's infinitely more competent than he is. And notice further, another interesting thing is that her nodal axis in the 21 plus range of Taurus Scorpio, that's precisely on his, or rather close to, near his midheaven axis. This kind of thing happens between people when there's an intense karmic connection, intense relationship between two people. And the nodes tend to relate to the idea of being seized or almost kidnapped in a sense by the other person. It's a way of saying there's an intense link, and to my understanding, very dangerous for the Orange Menace. There's no doubt about it. So, given that her transit patterns are looking up, they're already pretty good. Matter of fact, one of the things we should keep in mind is she's still going to be in there for months and probably going to do a ton more damage before she leaves Congress, because she's not leaving Congress until late January 2023. But overall, her chart is moving toward better and better energy. His is not. And so I continue to say, in this battle, she's going to win. And I think we all have to be thankful for that, because it's going to be, I think, very positive for our democracy, which I think in the final analysis is the most important factor.